In 1972, researchers at MIT concluded that society was on track to collapse by the year 2040. A follow-up study conducted by analysts at KPMG found that we are ahead of schedule. In today's video, let's analyze how the MIT study forecasted the collapse of society, including the metrics they used to evaluate the world's trajectory, the insights these metrics provided on how our society might disintegrate. Additionally, we must consider whether the study's earlier than predicted timeline for collapse is genuinely alarming or simply a matter of overemphasizing statistical correlations. The limits to growth. The main objective of the MIT study, titled The Limits to Growth, was to determine the sustainability of our current utilization of the world's resources, and it concluded that it was not sustainable. The study was noteworthy for being among the first economic research projects to employ dynamic systemic modules using computers. Essentially, a system dynamics is a software application that strives to simulate the operations of intricate real-world systems by reproducing them in software. Although this approach may seem familiar to us today, it was a novel concept in the 1960s and 70s, where computers were not as advanced as they are today. Despite the challenges, the MIT team managed to develop World 3, a computer program that modeled the global economy. This system incorporated various variables, including population growth and industrial capacity, and significantly, it simulated how different factors would interact with one another. Economists frequently joke that any modification to the economy influences at least three other aspects. To overcome this issue, economists often assume ceteris paribus, or that all other variables remain constant in their models. Assuming ceteris paribus is valuable for analyzing cause and effect relationships in a vacuum. However, this strategy fails to reflect the actual world, where things seldom stay constant simply to simplify modeling. Forecasting the future is an arduous task under the most favorable conditions, and it becomes nearly impossible if you overlook nearly all variables. The aim of World 3 was to accomplish just that. The software was equipped with tools to simulate various aspects, ranging from birth rates to agricultural technology. The intention was to capture the crucial role these variables play in preserving our contemporary lifestyle. However, because they interact with each other, these variables are vulnerable to feedback loops. An economic feedback loop? Feedback loops are a common occurrence in economies. For instance, decreasing birth rates can result in an aging population, which in turn can impose greater financial strain on younger workers to support the elderly, either through direct care or indirectly via taxes to finance pension schemes and elder care. This financial pressure could result in younger workers having less time and fewer desirable conditions to start their own families, leading to a further drop in birth rates. This example is particularly relevant to the MIT study, since the study examined only 5 variables, namely population, industrial output, food production, available resources, and pollution, despite taking hundreds of variables into account in its computer-generated global economy model. It is essential to keep in mind that this report was issued in 1972, long before climate change became a major concern for the scientific community, and well before it was generally acknowledged as a pressing issue. It is highly probable that if the study were conducted today, it would incorporate average global temperatures, but it was not, and hence it did not. Despite this, it is evident that each of these variables play a crucial role in our daily lives and work across the globe. More significantly, their interaction with each other is what matters the most. Assuming all things are equal except for food and population, the relationship between these two variables is interdependent. A decline in one affects the other, as long as other things remain equal. Which is more alarming? A decline in population leading to a decline in food production, or a decline in food production leading to a decline in population? Clearly, these are two distinct scenarios. What the report actually means. Now that we understand how to interpret the data generated by this report, what did it actually say? The researchers behind the report were cautious about predicting the future with certainty. and took into account the uncertainty of future technological advancements. They recognized that unforeseen developments could impact the predictions they made, and instead of presenting a single outcome, they ran the simulation multiple times with different initial conditions. To mitigate the uncertainty of predicting the future, the researchers of the report varied the initial conditions and ran the simulations repeatedly. The researchers conducted simulations that assumed constant innovation and steady worker productivity, while others assumed technological innovation continued to advance rapidly, making things like lab-grown food and resource extraction from space feasible. Finally, they also ran simulations assuming technological advancements would eventually reach a plateau. The researchers of the report tweaked various variables, including technological innovation, to run different simulations. They also considered lower or higher birth rates, recycling rates, resource discoveries, and levels of global trade. They attempted to account for every possible outcome within a realistic combination of factors and averaged out the trajectories of 5 critical factors to determine humans' destination. The 2040 deadline. The report generated a variety of outcomes due to the numerous models with varying variables. However, one thing remained constant: a significant decrease in the future, specifically around the year 2040. While there were thousands of potential outcomes that were not covered, the researchers focused on a few that fell within the standard deviation of possibilities. One of the outcomes that researchers considered was the comprehensive technology scenario, which offered a relatively optimistic view of the future. In this model, technological advancements would enable us to maintain our current way of life and keep up with the demands of a growing population. Although food production would still experience a notable decline, the model addressed the issue through the use of technology to combat water pollution and preservable arable land. Around 2040, the population stabilizes due to fewer children among wealthy urban populations, rather than starvation from insufficient food. Although industrial output peaks and decreases, living standards are not drastically reduced as efficient use of resources compensates for the decline. Efficient resource utilization would minimize pollution and guarantee that raw materials are not depleted. This outcome may not be ideal in terms of exponential growth in living standards as experienced in the past century, but it is not catastrophic either, as it would prevent societal collapse. The stabilized world scenario. In case you are not willing to count on a technological breakthrough, the researchers who published this report suggest an alternative. They call it the stabilized world scenario, which assumes that the world's current rate of innovation is maintained while putting significant investment in renewable energy sources and recycling processes. However, it is worth noting that this model does not account for the impact of climate change, and when it comes to recycling and renewable energy sources, it only focuses on the effects of resource depletion and local pollution, while ignoring externalities such as carbon emissions. Similar to the comprehensive technology outcome, this scenario involves voluntary reductions in industrial output before food shortages and excessive pollution become problems. The researchers consider this the most optimistic outcome among the various models, though they acknowledge the possibility of unforeseen technological developments that could radically reshape our economies. However, the 2021 follow-up study indicates that the original optimistic scenario from 1972 is no longer a realistic option due to the current state of captured variables. Instead, Gaia Harrington's study suggests that we are currently on the path of the business as usual 2 scenario, which is not a favorable outcome. Business as usual 2. This model is the path that we are currently on, and it is not good news. This model highlights a clear collapse where pollution increases exponentially, recycling is not economically viable, and industrial output surpasses all possible scenarios. However, the model also predicts a drop in food production, leading to declining birth rates in wealthy nations and famines in poorer countries. The lack of young workers further reduces industrial output and economic prosperity, along with dwindling easily accessible resources. This scenario paints a picture of a total societal collapse. If the business as usual 2 model were to become reality, it would be preferable to be a middle-class worker today than a king in just 20 years. This realization is unsettling, and it's understandable if it causes some anxiety. Therefore, it's important to examine the criticisms of this model. The Limits to Growth report, which can be viewed as a doomsday warning, received criticism as expected. However, it is important to note that some of these criticisms have already been proven false, as the data continues to follow the predictions made in the business-as-usual model with alarming precision. Some critics argue that this study's modeling of human innovation is overly pessimistic. They acknowledge the current rates of innovation may not be adequate to prevent collapse, but believe that necessity can inspire invention. If society is pushed to the brink, more attention will be devoted to researching and investing in technologies that can shift us away from the doomsday scenario of the business-as-usual model and toward a more favorable outcome like the comprehensive technology scenario. Renewable technologies are always starting to gain momentum in the public market, indicating that we may be taking steps toward the comprehensive technology scenario. However, there are still areas where improvement is needed, such as waste management. Despite this, there has been progress in recent years, with advancements made in comparison to a decade ago. While I would like to provide my own perspective on what the future holds, I believe it would be best for you to read the two reports yourself. As much as I want to be optimistic about the future, I recognize that my own opinion carries less weight than the research published by a group of 17 top economists and scientists. In the best-case scenario, the predictions of the report are overly exaggerated, and we could use this as an opportunity to understand the limitations of creating systematic models to forecast the future. In the worst-case scenario, we may need to prepare ourselves to learn survival skills, such as foraging for food in the wilderness. What do you think? Will society really collapse by 2040? Comment your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with our latest uploads.